My name is Sangmani Labut. I am the Executive Director of the Eastside Freedom Library. Thank you for joining us this evening for our spring kickoff of the Love and Solidarity series. The series is part of a year-long 10th anniversary celebration for the Eastside Freedom Library. And throughout the series, we are embracing what we do best as an organization, fostering community dialogue to generate knowledge, exchange experiences, speaks truths, and foster active listening and learning. Our dedication lies in amplifying the voices and narratives of our community, and this is very critical for our mission. Tonight's program will highlight Professor KAFUI ATTOH's book, Disrupting D.C, The Rise of Uber and the Fall of the City. And also as part of the Love and Solidarity series, on May 2nd, we have Professor Kanishka Chaudhry, and we'll be discussing his latest book, Border Rules and Abolitionist Refusal. And on May 23rd, another conversation with Professor Sahan Journal on his book, Funk the Clock, Transgressing Time While Young, Perspective, and Black. So for the Love and Solidarity series, we will conclude the series with a symposium on June 7th and 8th, bringing together artists, activists, and organizers to explore the many ways that communities can unite in act of solidarity. Through sessions on topics such as labor and racial equity, community-driven archives, solidarity movements, and workshops on building sustainable movements. We'll examine collective action and mutual aid amidst historical injustices and contemporary challenges that we're facing as a society. And the symposium will culminate with an evening, a dinner. I hope that you all can join us for the symposium and dinner as well, featuring award ceremony to our community partners and individuals. But also we're thrilled to announce publicly for the first time that our keynote speaker for the evening dinner will be Ellen David Friedman. Ellen is a veteran labor organizer with nearly 50 years of experiences. Her work really epitomized the theme of love and solidarity. So we hope that you all can save the date, June 7th through the 8th, to join us for the symposium and community dinner celebration. So program like this that we're having today is really made possible by our supporters, collaborators, and partners. We know that creating lasting change requires help from our supporters. So your support through time, donation, commitment to the Eastside Freedom Library will really help us fulfill our mission to inspire solidarity, advocating for justice and working towards equity for all. So you might have seen envelopes in your chair, and so if you feel so inclined, to donate, there's envelopes available, but we're also asking folks to support us towards our special 10th anniversary campaign. Your generous donation will really ensure us to meet our goal for the remainder of the fiscal year, but also in the next 10 years of the organization. And our staff will be sharing the donation link on Zoom for you all in Zoom land as well. And I will now pass it along to our moderator for this evening's program, Jennings Mergenthal. Jennings is a board member of the Eastside Freedom Library's Board of Directors. Jennings is a former student organizer for Proud Indigenous Peoples for Education, who does community-centered public history and mapping-related work. And they also currently do collections-related community engagement work at the Science Museum and also occasionally do puppet shows. So thank you and take it away, Jennings.
Thanks, Sang. Well, I'd like to begin by introducing our panelists for this evening. So first from my left, Professor KAFUI ATTOH received his BA from Macalester College and his PhD in geography from Syracuse University. His broad interests are in the political economy of cities, the politics of public space, and debates in and around the idea of the right to the city. His research has focused on three areas: the role of transit within political economy of cities, the economic impact of limited access to transportation on disadvantaged communities, And I lost my place on the page. And the role of urban social movements, including the labor movement, in shaping mass transit policy. He's the author of Rights in Transit, Public Transportation, and the Right to the City in California's East Bay from University of Georgia Press in 2019. And his work has appeared in Urban Studies, Society in Space, Progress in Human Geography, the New Labor Forum, the Journal of Cultural Geography, the Geographical Bulletin, Acme, an e-journal for the critical geographies, as well as in a number of academic and popular ventures. Please welcome Professor Attoh. And next, Mr. EID Ali is the founder and president of the Minnesota Uber Lyft Drivers Association, MULDA. MULDA is an advocacy organization that fights for the rights of Uber and Lyft drivers. In 2023, EID and MULDA advocated for a statewide legislation in Minnesota that would have set minimum pay rates for Uber and Lyft drivers and provided them with protections against termination. Their statewide effort failed after Governor Tim Walz vetoed the bill. You can boo that part. Similarly, Mayor Jacob Frey vetoed a proposal for a Minneapolis city ordinance. Governor Walz then created a task force to make recommendations on regulations, and EID became a member of the task force. In early March of 2024, Minneapolis City Council passed a veto-proof ordinance increasing the pay rates for drivers. More on that later. Please give me a hand and welcome EID Ali. And finally, Alfonso Galvan is a reporter for the Sahan Journal, covering work, labor, small business, and entrepreneurship. Before joining the Sahan Journal, he covered breaking news and immigrant communities in South Dakota, specifically highlighting the challenges experienced by people in the criminal justice system. Alfonso is fluent in Spanish and has experience working in radio, television, magazines, and newspapers. He's a graduate of the University of Louisiana at Monroe and a member of the Investigative Reporters and Editors Incorporated and the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. Alfonso is a first-generation Mexican-American. Please give me one final hand. All right, so, kicking off our conversation for the evening, Professor Attoh, in Disrupting D.C, The Rise of Uber and Fall of the City, for sale at the back of the room and wherever fine books are sold, which you co-authored, could you tell us a bit about your book and the playbook that Uber sort of created and refined in D.C.?
Sure. So before I get to that question, I just wanted to take a brief moment to say how grateful I am to the Eastside Freedom Library, Sang, Jennings, Kristen, Clarence, everyone who made this possible and, got people to turn out. This is a great turnout, both in person, but also I hear online. So hello to people joining us on the internet. Yeah, so I'm just incredibly grateful to be back in St. Paul. I spent, like you, some formative years here as a McAllister student, and it's been really great to reconnect with some very old and good friends. I want to shout out Peter Radcliffe and Beth Cleary, especially. Just they have had a transformative impact on my life to say, yeah, it's wonderful to see you. It's also wonderful to see Eric Foreman. Well, this is quite surprise who is a colleague of mine at CUNY. So it's great to be here. So the book, I should, as the title, or as you will see, it's a co-authored book. Katie Wells is at Georgetown University. Declan Cullen is at the George Washington University. They obviously couldn't be here, so I'm going to try to faithfully represent our ideas. And I think they're listening to us. So if I get anything wrong, I know they're going to tell me, which is fine. That's part of our partnership. And we're still friends after writing a book together, which is an impressive thing. So the book, what's the book about? The book is about Uber and about Uber in DC. Uber launched in DC in late 2011. The company, which was founded by Travis Kalanick and one other person whose name escapes me, was founded in 2009. It DC was the sixth city in which Uber launched. It launched in like San Francisco, Boston, New York, and 3 other cities. And DC is noteworthy, as we argue in the book, for both being the first place that Uber faced legislative pushback or a legislative challenge. And it was also the place that Uber overcame that challenge, right? And part of what we kind of go through in the book is what that looked like. And so the book starts in 2012 with what was called Operation Rolling Thunder. This is the name that Travis Kalanick gave this sort of campaign. And it was a campaign that was prompted by the city council's effort to impose a minimum fare on all Uber trips in the city. And I think they were going to set it like 5 times the amount of what they were charging at for kind of the legacy livery services in DC at the time. And Travis Kalanick and Uber like totally flipped out. And they, with the kind of contact information of everyone who had taken an Uber trip over the last 6 months since they had launched, they encouraged customers to flood the inboxes of their council people, demanding that the city council, table the proposal that they were discussing. Over the course of 18 hours, the city council received over 50,000 emails from angry constituents saying, get your hands off our Uber, basically. And it was dead on arrival. The kind of ramifications, repercussions of that, could be, were described by any number of like political analysts. And there was a guy named Bradley Tusk, and there's a quote that I'll find it, I'll read, because he described the way he described the kind of the impact of Operation Rolling Thunder, I think is really telling. This is from a book he wrote, kind of touting his own involvement in the whole thing. The DC fight confirmed everything we needed to know. Just like Uber was seriously disrupting the status quo in the taxi industry itself, we could disrupt the status quo of governing too. Calling entrenched interests out on corruption and pay-to-pay politics wasn't new. Using your own app to mobilize your customers to swamp their elected officials with complaints was. This would be the thesis behind dozens of campaigns we've run for startups ever since. So that we kind of, the book starts there because we're saying, what's going on? What is this? How do we explain Uber's power, legislative power, its ability to kind of needle its way into the kind of cracks and crevices of local government. And part of what we argue is that part of what makes has made Uber so successful is its ability to kind of fill a both political and infrastructural vacuum. Okay, and part of what I think is interesting about that, and so all the chapters kind of talk about what that vacuum looks like. It talks about the ways Uber has mobilized rather cynically problems of racial discrimination in the taxi industry. It talks about Uber's use of the kind of language of innovation and smart tech to kind of pitch itself to cities. It talks about how Uber has taken advantage of kind of like the political sclerosis at the local level around all sorts of issues to kind of say, well, we can do it. Just let us do it, right? Just let us provide paratransit. Just let us fill the gaps in public transportation. Just let us take Black people to Black neighborhoods because we don't discriminate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that playbook, we argue, was developed in DC, and it's kind of shown itself again in New York City in debates around Uber, in the fight over Prop 22 in California, and the kind of response to AB 5, which had was an attempt to reclassify Uber drivers as employees. It's something that's kind of repeated over and over again. I can keep going, but that's kind of what the book's about. You got to pick it up to get more of the details, but yeah.
Local context for Eden Alfonso, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the victory of Malda at the Minneapolis City Council a couple of weeks ago, and both what it means and what was the long and winding road to get here.
I think I can start that, and Eden can jump in afterwards. But a lot of people locally in Minneapolis and the Twin Cities, the first time they kind of hear about issues with Uber and Lyft is now that Minneapolis City Council has passed an ordinance that was veto-proof, right? That set a minimum compensation model for drivers. But this didn't happen within the last couple months. Rather, it's been years in the making. And I think it can tell you, when I first got here to the Twin Cities 2 years ago almost, one of the first stories that I covered was rideshare drivers. Interestingly enough, at Sahan Journal, we like to focus on coverage of immigrant refugee communities. And here in the Twin Cities, Uber and Lyft drivers are predominantly East African, right? A lot of our drivers come from immigrant communities. So they started off, and it wasn't a union that came in and said, hey, let's get the drivers together. It was more of a grassroots effort. It was drivers and people like Ede coming together and saying, hey, we want better pay, we want better protections, rights. What can we do if we come together? And sort of it started on multiple fronts, right? Where they went to the Minneapolis City Council to try to get an ordinance passed. At the same time, they're at the state level trying to get a bill passed. As was previously mentioned, they faced a veto at the state level from Governor Walz, and they faced 2 vetoes at the city level from the Minneapolis mayor. And second one, thankfully for drivers, was veto-proof. They had a majority of the council, 9 votes, and they were able to override that veto. So for them, that victory, it was a very significant victory. It was their first victory in almost 2 years of organizing.
Thank you, Alfonso. My name is EID Ali again, and yeah, it was quite of a bit of a ride that we did what we have done so far. So it was not easy to organize folks who were who gave up a long time ago because they never thought that the system would work for them based on the background they're from. So it was hard for everyone to convince some of the drivers that I was with for the last 2 years, but it consumed and took a lot of my time. I'm a dad of 5 kids, and for the last 17 months that I have been doing this, organizing folks, just convincing drivers that it can be doable if we can trust the system and kind of take the next level and still have that faith that someday something positive will come out of that. Because like I said earlier, I'm a dad of 5 kids, and I wasn't able to do anything else while I have my own family and raising 5 kids, and the youngest from the range of 5 to 12. I already have a very busy life, but at the same time, I have had all kind of drivers who are in the same situation as I was, who are family folks, and we're bleeding and just complaining and talking about how can we raise our voices, how can we get paid better, how can we raise our families like any other families, because we are not doing something unlawful. I mean, we are working and doing what we should be doing. We are paying taxes like everybody else, but we are not being treated the way that other people are being treated. We are not getting paid fairly, and So I took the shot and just made that commitment that I have to at least do this for quite some time. But it took me almost 2 years. And like I said, for the first 17 months, I was spending my my own income because I thought that if I don't do it, who's going to do it? So it was quite a bit of a sacrifice that I have done. Thank God we put something together and brought it, like Alfonso said, all the way to the governor's desk. Unfortunately, it was the only and first, I guess, bill that he vetoed while he was a governor. And then also, we never said, okay, we need to go back home and enough is enough, we are done. No, we just said, okay, is there any other opportunity? Thank God the governor signed an executive order, and there was a task force that was formed, and I became part of the task force. And it took me another 5-6 months to kind of sit down with some other folks, including Uber and Lyft. It was a little bit of torture because, I mean, you're just sitting next to someone who doesn't see you as someone who is fighting for a livable wage. But however, I thought that was an opportunity that I had to take advantage from. And then quite ended a place where I was half-baked bread, because things that we have talked about mainly were 5 areas or 5 items. Transparency, which was to share the drivers about what the customers or passengers are paying, which was not the case in the beginning. Deactivation, which like firing the driver without knowing why he or she was fired. Kind of establishing a place where drivers can come for support. And insurance, basically, which was one of the most important thing for us at the time, because there were so many drivers who were hurt and were not able to get compensated for the injuries they suffered. In one instance, there was an Uber driver who was married to a wife with 5 children, and she was also pregnant with the 6th child, and he was on his way picking up a customer while he was shot by a stray bullet. And then Uber and Lyft didn't give a damn, because they didn't see him as a human being, and they didn't even call his wife to say sorry about what has happened. So it was very important for us to make sure that the insurance part was one of the things that we wanted to be taken care of. So we won up to $1 million coverage for anything that's not related to accident or car accident, because you have someone in a car and you get hurt by the passenger. Before, it was not the case that you were going to get compensated. But now, because of the task force that was formed by the governor, we just kind of agreed that that needs to be acknowledged, and then $1 million was the deal that we agreed on. And the 5th item was the fair wage. So Uber and Lyft said, no, we're not going to give you a fair wage. And that was the end of that task force. And the last meeting that we have was December 19th, and then we submitted everything we had to the governor, and that's what the state legislators are working on now. But at the same time, like Alfonso mentioned, we were vetoed twice by the Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey. Thank God we mobilized enough city council members who finally overrode his veto. But that's not the end of the game. I think we are nowadays bombarded with news all over the place saying that we are the bad guy. The drivers don't deserve that because, because of Uber and Lyft, whatever they did, made Uber and Lyft to leave the state. And thank God Alfonso is here, but we are just also feeling the heat that the story that is being told on the news every day is only one-sided story. No one is just listening to the driver's side. We are not getting enough coverage. But we think that the drivers are human beings. They are families, friends, brothers and sisters, our neighbors. So we need to think about them. We need to know more about what they are going through. And I believe the reason why I'm here today is to at least kind of raise up or just kind of share that experience that the drivers are going every day, and to also get your solidarity and support so that someday in the near future we all celebrate for that victory, where the drivers are going to be respected and treated like every other human being, and at least get paid the fair and minimum wage, not, more than minimum wage, the minimum wage. That's what we're fighting for. So hopefully that will be done sometime in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you. And Alfonso, could you talk a little bit about what conventional coverage of this ongoing movement has looked like, and how yours is in many ways differently framed and offers a different, and one might say more useful perspective?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, the majority of rideshare drivers in the metro are from immigrant communities. A lot of them aren't used to talking to media, and in this fight, they're going against multi-billion-dollar companies. So where a lot of people, when they hear about Lyft and Uber making these threats to leave the city, they hear it because they have the apps downloaded. The apps can send you a notice just like that. They can send you an email. They have your information. But for drivers, it's a little harder for them to have their voices heard. A lot of them, they have to talk to media. And one of the issues is, me as a reporter, when I go talk to some of these drivers, ethically, you're trying to get someone's full name, right? Give me your first name, last name. Well, these people drive for a living, so they're scared of retaliation from the apps. They don't want to give you their full name, and if they can't do that, sometimes you can't get the story out. So a lot of times you're trying to focus on just the people involved in this, and not try to have it be one-sided where it's just, okay, what are you getting from the app? What type of email are they sending? You know, they might send an email and say, hey, we have this many drivers that have signed a petition that say they don't want this ordinance to pass. Well, then you have EID and over 1,000 drivers that say, hey, we support this ordinance and we want better compensation. So it's just been a push and pull of like, can we tell these stories, and how do we tell them? How do we humanize this issue and show you that it involves people, it involves your neighbors?
Thank you. And in the book, KAFUI, you talk about how Uber sort of in DC entered the market and left regulators sort of unable to catch up, unable to use processes meant to regulate the taxi industry to apply to Uber, and how Uber's, as we've talked about, direct communication with the people who use the service means that they have been very effectively able to mobilize their customers as a political unit. Could you talk a little bit more about that and how it developed and how it's spread to other cities?
Sure. Just to reflect on what I've just heard, because it's very fascinating. I think I'll get to the question, but DC has in some ways there's some similarities in that a lot of the Uber drivers in DC are also East African. We haven't seen the same level of organization or confrontation that we've seen here, which is unfortunate. And a lot of the drivers who, there's a large Ethiopian and Eritrean population in DC. A lot of the Uber drivers were taxi drivers before, like they just kind of switched over as as the case here when Uber came in, totally decimated the taxi industry. But I think what we're seeing, what we will probably see in the next month is this same sort of thing of pitting customers against workers, right? And it's an ugly thing, you know. Like when I was just when Tim Walz did the first veto, one of the statements he made was, we can't have Uber and Lyft leave because you know, a lot of these smaller municipalities outside of, you know, the Twin Cities have partnered with Lyft to provide paratransit service. And, you know, the kind of first reading is, oh, that's terrible, we can't let Uber and Lyft leave. But then, you know, you think a little, you use your brain, you think a little bit, and you're like, what? How the hell have we ceded paratransit service to non-unionized, you know, workers? Like, how has that happened? And why have we let that happen? And because ultimately it becomes, oh, Uber and Lyft are holding the public hostage, you know, and the the drivers are the ones who are, you know, going to be hurt. So it's just a very frustrating thing to see, and the media coverage, I think, too, has just played into that. What are tourists gonna do at the airport? You know, and then you hear stories about, you know, people losing their life, and it's just like, okay, we're just gonna to have a little perspective here. So, sorry, what was the question?
No, that was good. That was great.
No, the total, you know, I think the language, you know, academics use, like corporate capture or regulatory capture of, you know, you know, and part of it is like Uber has tremendous amounts of, you know, they spend a lot of money, you know, on lobbyists and stuff like that. But then there's also just the kind of, there's also the asymmetry with respect to data and how much they know as compared to what cities know. But yeah, I think at least in the DC case, there was almost a complete buy-in at every level of government. I mean, it's DC, so it's kind of not that many levels. It's just the city council and the mayor. But yeah, they're at the, you know, transportation planners. There's a kind of like, what are we gonna do? You know, and when we were doing the research, DC was undergoing something called Safe Track, where they were renovating the metro system, and you know, Uber provided a apparently necessary service. But again, it's this ability to pit customers against drivers, and I think if people think about it long enough, they get the sense of, okay, well, you know, this is playing into a race to the bottom sort of dynamic, and which is really dangerous. And so, if you care about workers, not only Uber drivers but all workers, it's really it's essential to fight, you know, to stand with Mulda, or to stand with workers, because, you know, if they win it, you know, that's you know, a lesson you can point to at your own job, or, you know, especially as the gig economy expands and spreads. So I know that was kind of all over the place, but.
And it seemed very, very cynical that in their attempts to sort of wrest public control, Uber has very defensively deployed, oh, think about paratransit service, think about the disabled people who need this. And in the book you mentioned, oh, think about, you know, how Uber is actively combating racism, and how Uber is, you know, providing a neoliberal future, you know, under the guise of, you know, corporate identity and corporate personhood. One of the things that Ida, I want to get your opinion on is, so at a you know, at a factory, it's easy to form a worker organization because you're all in the same place doing the same thing at the same time. What did the process of organizing Moldo look like? Because as Uber is claims repeatedly, you aren't employees. You're not, you're in your own cars. Like what did forming that organization look like?
Thank you. That's a very good question. Well, I had a little bit of a background before Uber and Lyft came to the town. There was a similar issue with the drivers, like was said before. Most of those drivers were also cab drivers before Uber and Lyft came to the town, and they had the same issue with Minneapolis. So I became a vice president of an organization that used to advocate for the cab drivers at the time, and then Uber Lyft came, and then drivers switched to from cab to Uber Lyft. So after 5-6 years, some of those folks that knew me from back then reached me out and said, we have a similar or maybe even bigger issue now with Uber and Lyft, so we need your assistance again. So it was another call. Yeah, and I just showed up with coffee shop close to the KAFUI in South Minneapolis. With 22 drivers, and I bridged them, even though they didn't like to hear that because of they were kind of assuming that I was kind of acting like a teacher. It was a little bit boring, but I just told them that it's going to take some time if we need to see some change someday in the future. But mainly, I was just educating them about what we need to do and all of that. So. I think I only have maybe, and that was June 16, 2022. And I only have, I think, maybe 2-3 people who are with me from that folks. They were 22. But I was quite doing things differently because, like it was mentioned, these drivers are mainly or majority of them from East Africa who have lost any trust whatsoever that about the system, and then there were so many times that people were taking advantage from them, even in the community. They were not getting enough folks who were advocating for them instead, people were still taking advantage from them. So I try to kind of do something different in this case so that I can get their attention. That's why I said I am not going to do anything. I'm going to spend my time, my own money, to make sure that I am doing things for them. So I didn't ask them anything. I was just talking to them. I was just inviting them someplace, paying my the cost of the gathering and everything. So that is how they started to listen. And finally, after 2 months, I kind of organized about 500 drivers to a hotel, a nice hotel, where I said, this is a treat. Finally, you've been listening to me while I was just struggling. You just paid attention to what I was telling. So I get 500 drivers, all of the East African elected officials, at least there were 5 of them, and then also an attorney that I hired at the time from my pocket. So that is how it started, and that's how Uber and Lyft kind of paid attention. They have seen the clip that was recorded in that event, and that's how they just started kind of paying attention. But that's how everybody has started paying attention, especially the drivers. So from there on, it was an election year, 2022. So that was not it. We started to reach out to some of those folks who were running for re-elections, and then it was a good chance that they took advantage from us, and we were just trying to build a relationship with them because we were knocking doors for them as well. And that there was a relationship that was built from there. And later on, when some of them won or were re-elected, we just knocked their offices and said, we were knocking doors for you guys. Now we're going to knock your office doors, and we need you now. So that is how it started. It was not an easy and fun thing, but it paid off. The persistence, the patience, and some of those folks who were with me were also listening. They finally realized that with honest leadership and someone who is not asking them to pay for what he's doing or for what he's doing for them, um, that is how it started to trickle out. And finally, we get where we are now. So it's an amazing journey, but it was not a one that was kind of a sweet sugar kind of thing. But it just consumed too much of my time and even my family paid the biggest price, I guess. So yeah, that's how we get to where we're at today.
Great, thank you. And one of the things that's made, preparing to moderate this a little bit difficult is that, the news is constantly changing, especially in light of the various threats to pull out. Both Uber and Lyft currently threatening to leave the Minneapolis or the Minneapolis area by May 1st. I wonder if we could talk, for anyone who wants to, about sort of the history of threats here or more broadly, and how these threats are, a part of the playbook that Uber uses to sort of bully and cajole elected officials into stopping regulating them.
Yeah, I can speak to that. I know everybody, it's the talk of the town right now, obviously, that Uber and Lyft say May 1st they're leaving. And I think Uber and Lyft both said they're leaving Minneapolis May 1st. Uber said they're leaving the metro completely on May 1st. But it's not the first time they've made a threat like this. EID has seen this a lot as we've covered this for the last year and a half. It used to be anytime there was a vote coming, whether it be at the city council or if the bill passed the House, Senate, and was on the governor's desk, that's when you see that increase in threats and notices, emails coming from the app saying, hey, we're leaving, talk to your council member, talk to the governor, email them, tell them that you want us to stay, right? Then it happened, not too long ago that one of the vetoes was overwritten, and drivers were on a clear path to get increased compensation. And once again, Uber and Lyft said, hey, we're going to leave. But it's been a threat that they've done in other cities where things like this has happened. There are a few cases, particularly Austin, where they did pull out for a little bit, came back soon afterwards. So there is a possibility that they will leave, but a lot of people see it as when they say, hey, we're leaving on May 1st, it's a guaranteed. That's why a lot of people are saying, oh, this is a game of chicken. Let's see what's going to happen. And because of this, you do have other rideshare alternatives that have stepped up and said, hey, we want to go into the market. And as you mentioned, every day there's more news coming out, right? Every day I'm looking out, I'm calling EID, I'm calling other people. And just today, right before I headed out here, he had more news from me, right? He emailed me, and he had some news, and I'll let him share that. But it's a lot of people are wondering right now, okay, what are the alternatives? Who are we going to use? There's more options than people realize. It's just you're kind of used to, you can take Uber, you can take Lyft, the app is available. Now it's about getting to know other services that could be coming here, right?
Just on the, I don't have a crystal ball. None of us do, so it's hard to know exactly. But I think that's exactly right. Where, we have the history. We can look at what Uber's done in other places, and it's threatened to leave Austin, Seattle, New York. In all those places, it's still operating. One of the strategies. I mean, the Austin case is really interesting because, often what they, if they lose at the local level, they try to do state preemption, right, and just jump scales, and try to get the state legislature to pass legislation that they want, right, and that happened in Texas. So, you know, it's also interesting because in DC there's no levels. It's just one level, you know, and so they only have to convince a strong mayor to do it. And so, but I do think the 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 there is a possibility, an opening here for something different, and also to rethink, right, you know, this kind of how the state has gotten into this hostage situation. You know, the driver co-ops and you know, public option, but I think there's also thinking about, you know, okay, how should we do paratransit? How can we invest in public transit? You know, all these kind of broader questions that, you know, prevent this sort of I don't know, how would you describe? Yeah, hostage kind of situation, which I think is good.
And I want to invite online folks to submit questions in the chat. I have a running thing that I'm keeping an eye on. We will come to the in-person people in a little bit for questions, so you can start thinking about them now. And if you begin your question with, "This is more of a comment," you will be asked to leave. But I use that joke every event I moderate, and it kills every time. You talk in the book about how sort of Uber and Lyft's creation as post-2008 corporations, they've sort of seized on a weakening in government social services and sort of move in to disrupt them. And then they do this with, you know, exploitive conditions and by issuing regulation and making themselves into special cases that, you know, can't ever be held to standards of treating its workers legally or humanely. Is the exploitation a intrinsic piece of this? Are these companies reformable, or is exploitation such a core part of the model that they can't continue to function in an equitable and just society?
Great question. So I mean, it's interesting because if you know, in some ways, you know, Uber and, well, I'll just speak about Uber. You know, it obviously relies on exploitation, but it's also, you know, until very recently has proved not to be a profitable company. So it has all the kind of has all the, it's like a yeah, it's a traditionally capitalist you know, there's exploitation happening, but it's not like it's not functioning like a, you know, like a regular company. It's relying on tons of venture capital to kind of keep going like a zombie. So you know, that's one thing. I think the other thing is, yeah, I think there's a degree to which transportation is, I just know this from public transportation. Transportation is not like a profitable, it's not a profit center. And so, you know, I think they will struggle. And in some ways that probably explains why they are fighting so hard against any attempt at change, whether it's classification, which would completely destroy the business model, or whether it's a bump in compensation. So yeah, I do not think they are compatible with a just society. Yeah, it took me a while to get there, but yes.
If there's
Anyone else want to try to tackle that one?
Eid, I think one of the things that, you know, people reading the news, reading the reports, are gripped with is sort of a desire to help and support, but not really a knowledge of how to do that. So people going back and forth between like, is the way to do this to take Uber, to not take Uber, to, you know, amplify the voices of drivers. So what for you and for Molda is helpful to have our lovely members of the public, to have them do to support you?
Yeah. Well, there are so many ways that we can ask the public, especially here, our audience, a wonderful audience, to support Molda. Molda is a very young organization that advocates for the drivers in general, even though that majority of those drivers are immigrants from hailing from East Africa, like was mentioned. This organization needs a lot of support so that it can stay strong and keep working and supporting and helping those drivers. So we do have a financial issue because it's a nonprofit organization, and we are struggling in terms of financial. So if we can get support financially, that is one area that we might need to share with the public. Second thing is that we might need folks to always reach out to the elected officials, and we don't have a shortage of drivers who are willing to do that, but sometimes it takes some time to educate them and tell them the best way to do it, because like I said, those immigrants, those drivers are immigrants from East Africa. They have all kind of communication or language barriers and so forth. So we might need sometimes folks who can help us to educate them and tell them the best way to navigate, even though that they have learned quite a bit of civics for the last 2 years. But that is one area we might need to, we do have at least over 300 drivers sitting in a airport waiting lot every 2 hours, and we just go there sometimes. So if we can get people who can go with us, kind of educate them, telling them that there is a hope, there is a light at the end of the tunnel, this is the best way to do, we need to be united, we need to be pushing it. So if we can get assistance from the public to just at least kind of volunteer some of their time to go with more of the folks, because we are volunteering all the time, and kind of convince folks that there is a way that this can be done, just give them some hope. There are some other ways. We have social media that we might need folks to just follow our news and whatever we are posting, so that they can amplify, so that we have so many people who are getting our news and what we are just trying to share with the public. So on and on and on, but in general, I believe that we have been having quite a bit of coverage about what has been done. The only area that we are missing is to just write op-eds and just write about what those drivers are going through, who they are, and so that so many people are being educated about the real issues. It's not that Uber, which is so essential nowadays to the public, that is going to leave, and we feel so bad about it, but that there is another part of this story, which is the drivers, family folks who are doing this for a living and who are paying the price. And I have an office in Bloomington. I at least get 10 to 15 people every day saying that, can you help me, because my account was deactivated, means I was fired. I invested so much money into this car, and I have a family. I don't have, I don't know how I will pay my rent this month because I was fired after I spent so much money um, I've invested all of my, savings into this car, and some of them, there is someone that I'm going to meet tomorrow. He told me that he was working for 5 months and he was not paid by Lyft because he didn't have a work permit, and Lyft is not paying him. And he told me that now I get a permit, but I don't know how I'm going to be paid. He owes like $17,000. He has been doing this for the last 6-7 months. And he told me that when he called me today, we're normally closed on Fridays. I told him that I'm going to see you on Saturday because we are open Saturdays, Sundays, and we're only closed on Fridays. I said, am I going to see you on Saturday or maybe Monday? He said, I cannot wait until Saturday. I want to see you tomorrow. Why? Because I didn't eat for the last 3 days. And I don't have money to pay my rent this month. So I want to see you tomorrow so that you can help me right away and talk to Lyft and tell them that I need my money this time because I get my work permit. So it's those we are seeing all of these stories every day. So we need at least those stories to be out, public to know what's going on with those drivers, how they're being treated. And the way to do is just to have wonderful folks like you guys, to take that message and share it with their neighbors and with everybody else, their workers, colleagues, and everybody. That way we are going to be well informed and we will know what's happening in our communities.
Alfonso, could you talk a little bit about what covering Uber and Lyft organization legislation has been like, and has it been different from other reporting on work? Part of Uber's argument is, these aren't employees, these are contractors. But given that your beat is work and business and labor, how does this compare to the other aspects of that you've reported on?
Yeah, well, earlier this month, start of March, I covered several strikes from different unions across the metro, right? Thousands of workers. And leading up to that, I was covering anytime they had a strike vote and keeping track of how many of these workers were united in their efforts as they were fighting for new contracts. Uber drivers, Lyft drivers, rideshare drivers, they're considered independent contractors. They don't have those unions, right? They have organizations like MOLDA that they, gather up in and talk in a collective voice. But yeah, they're different because a lot of them, like I mentioned in the past, if you're a union employee and you speak out or you speak to me and you speak negatively of where you work, you can't be reprimanded for that, right? But as an independent contractor, some of these people don't have that guaranteed protection, so they're scared to talk. So just being able to amplify and tell their stories has become more difficult than what I'm used to with when I cover someone who is a union worker, because a lot of people are scared to talk. Again, we struggle with sometimes language barriers and other issues like that, because like Eid said, some of the people, maybe their English isn't the best. In cases like that, sometimes we have to bring interpreters in, and it just, it makes the process a little harder, but yeah, that's what I've been doing.
Thank you. And we've seen both, in the book in DC and here in Minnesota, that the rideshare companies really have the ear of the executive. The state legislature can pass something, and then the governor can veto it, and the city council can pass something, and then the mayor can veto it. And in the book, you speak to how Uber really got the attention as coming into DC, getting the ear of the mayor as, this is bold, this is innovative. Why, in your view, in your views, are the individuals so susceptible to this when the broader electoral system is pushing change in a different direction? Is it just, they are that susceptible to business, or is it a flaw of the individual? Is it a flaw of the political system? All sorts of small questions for me tonight.
Well, at least in the DC case, everyone remembers Operation Rolling Thunder. Um, so you did have council people who, you know, were ostensibly, pro-labor and self-described, progressives, um, who could point to, well, look, we got like 50,000 emails from customers. They want this. Or, I've been hearing complaints about taxis not picking up people to go to Anacostia forever. And last thing I heard, what Uber told me is that they take people to Anacostia. So I can't really speak to the Minneapolis example, but at least in DC there were the experience, the experience of Uber coming in did kind of rattle whatever thin progressive commitments they might have had, if you know what I mean. So.
I'll go to a question from the online audience. Can you speak on Uber and Lyft being another attempt at corporate privatization of the public sector? How does it draw away from the progress in public transportation and the better paying and often union jobs in that area?
I could take that one. I mean, I think the partnerships that, so I mentioned the paratransit thing in Minnesota. This was also the case in the DMV, that there have been, in fact, there was, the metro system in DC like shuts down. Like it's not like New York, it's not a 24-hour system. And so you have a lot of service sector workers who, can't get home after, they can't get home using the metro, and public buses stop running. And so I think Metro partnered with Lyft in this case to provide after-hour vouchers to low-wage service sector workers to take, it's basically a subsidy of Lyft to provide public transit service that was lacking. And you've seen that in different, it's not just DC, that, there was in Pinellas, Florida, it's outside Orlando, they got rid of fixed route transit service and started, using vouchers. If you needed public transit, you could use, Uber and Lyft. And then it is really a kind of a perverse kind of thing, because they're relying again on precarious contract workers to provide what should be considered a real public service. And then Uber, doesn't like a regulation, or they are. So they say, okay, and then what is left? There's a classic case. There was a Canadian city who went all in on this, and it didn't last very long, because they realized after getting rid of the fixed route bus service that they couldn't get enough Uber drivers to provide comparable service. So just everyone was stranded again, and so when Uber when they had to file to be a public company, they listed in their kind of like proposal to investors that we are in competition with public transportation. For years they had said, oh, we provide last mile, first mile service. Actually, it's great for public transit, but at least in their kind of IPO letter, whatever it's called, they were honest in terms of seeing public transportation as like a growth area, but it's not public, right? It's not, right? And we can see that, right? It's not subject to democratic control. Doesn't have the same labor standards. It doesn't have the same transparency. I mean, the huge issue in DC too was just figuring out just basic things about Uber's operation. And with the legislation they passed in 2014, written in the legislation was that you could not use the Freedom of Information Act to gather information about Uber that the DC Taxi Commission had collected. So not transparent, not worker friendly, not public. You know, you go on and on and on. So it's a, forgot the question, but yeah, the privatization of, you know, public services through these sort of gig economies is perverse and dangerous and bad. It's bad.
Add to that as well, because you mentioned previously, like, oh, like how is it reporting on Uber and Lyft? Kind of like you mentioned, I can do a FOIA request, a Freedom of Information Act, and I can get data on Metro Transit here locally. I can get maintenance, you know, reports. I can get different things like that. But when I started covering Uber and Lyft drivers, one of the big questions was like, all right, how much are they paying the drivers? So that's one of the first questions I asked. I said, oh, how much, what's the formula? And, you know, to this day, I don't know, right? You know, they have their claims and they've thrown different numbers around. Recently, that state report came out on how much drivers were getting paid. And, you know, now that these city ordinance just got passed and they have a compensation model for a minimum compensation. You have that, you have one at the state level, and now at least that has caused Uber and Lyft to come out and back a model of their own. They have their own formula. They say, all right, we support 89 cents a mile and 49 cents a minute, I think is what they're saying, which 89 cents a mile, I think the city ordinance in Minneapolis is $1.40. So they're still a ways off, right? But that's been one of the issues as well. And that kind of happens when, okay, you don't depend on public transit. Instead, you depend on a private company like Uber and Lyft.
I want to open it up now to questions from in the room. Clarence is coming around with a microphone.
Thank you, and thank you all for being here today. My name is Mary Jo Shifsky, and I have a question, I think mostly for you, EID. We're at a point right now where the legislation was approved by a council, which I'm delighted to say has a socialist tendency, and my council person is one of those people. But my question is, what's going to happen next, really? And when the council changes again, I mean, how can we as citizens support this kind of activity in our community and not have it be dependent on people who change? You know, the council's elected every 2 to 4 years. So is that something that worries you at all? Your support, because your support for the legislation, for the legislation, is completely dependent on the makeup of the current city council in Minneapolis.
Thank you. That is true. But that's why I don't take no for an answer. So, of course, they're not going to be there forever. But we are going to tell them as long as they are what they need to do, and that's why we elected them. And that's one thing that I'm proud of, kind of sharing and teaching those drivers. One of the things that I always tell them is that last year we have spent, I don't know, more than, I don't know, maybe 200 hours going back and forth to the state capitol. So when I joke with them, I always say that we do have the Senate building, and then you have the Capitol, and then you have the House of Representative building, 3 buildings that are next to each other. I always tell them, you used to just kind of pass in front of this building, and the closest that you used to get is to just pick up someone who is in front of it. So you have never been inside of those buildings, but thank God, nowadays you just go inside of it. You know who are the people who are inside of these buildings. Some of them are the people that you voted for, but you have never seen them. You don't even know them. And those are the people who make those decisions of everything that you do in your life. And if we have benefited anything, this is a lesson that you guys have learned. So you are well educated. So now they're able to even not only go and knock on their offices, but they are even able to just send them emails and say, you're my representative, you're my city council member, you're my senator. I mean, I want you to do this and that. So with that being said, yes, I would say that life goes on, but we'll have to always make sure that we don't get tired of someone saying no, because I remember our last veto, we only have 7 city council members who passed our first city of Minneapolis city ordinance. And then we were not able to, when the mayor vetoed, we were not able to get 2 more people to override his veto. But then what I did was just I kind of campaigned last year, and thank God we get 2 more driver-friendly or progressives came into the numbers. So that's how we get to 9 folks. So that's why I always like to say, okay, no is not the answer. So yeah, as long as you're above the ground, you need to fight and keep moving, and that's how it should be.
Another question from in the room, if there's one emergent. Otherwise, all right, you can think on it for another sec. Or
Yeah, I mean, while someone is thinking about their question, and I know you have them, remember we have subtext books here tonight. They have copies of the book for sale. You can also stop in their store as well, and they have other books too. I hope everyone got the sign-up sheet, and yeah, I wanted to make sure that I mentioned those 2 things, and yeah, we're ready for another question. It's right next to you.
I guess this is a 2-part question for both. Sorry, I'm not good at names. You, and you, how's that? I'm sorry. But what I want to know is, first of all, do you think Uber, which I think was the first of the gig ones, planned it to be an actual part-time job, or did you think that they knew in advance, figured in advance that this would actually become a full-time job for the drivers? And then the second question for you is, what about St. Paul?
I don't know if the founders or developers or engineers at Uber or Lyft or any of them have thought deeply about kind of working conditions, who's working, who's not working. I think early on it's interesting in DC. Uber started as a black car service, so it's kind of a luxury sedan service. It was only in 2014, so 3 years after they had started in DC, that you had Uber X, which could be any you didn't have to have kind of livery license to opt to work for them, but that was just a requirement that the city had kind of had in place. So yeah, it's one of these questions where it's like kind of like I don't know what is in the mind or hearts of Travis. Yeah, in the beginning, and Travis Kalanick, I think he it's you start a company or an industry, you're thinking about how much money you're going to make, the profits, and if there's an opportunity for your business to do well. However that looks on the ground for workers probably comes third, fourth, fifth, or never in your mind. So.
Thank you. St. Paul a number of times. I just emailed the city council members and also the mayor as well. They were lucky enough they didn't see me because I was busy with Minneapolis. So last Friday, I was invited on an iftar event, which Senator Fateh did, and it was in your backyard, actually, Metro State University. That's where it was held. And as I was looking around, I saw your mayor in there, and I said, "You're not lucky enough tonight. I'm gonna to skip from you." So I said, "Mayor, this is EID Ali, so the disruptor is on the way. So I will see you very soon." And he laughed. But anyways, I am in St. Paul at least 3, 4 times a day because of we do have our other legislation, state legislation going on. So I have been there yesterday. I was there today, and I will pretty much come every day because of we are working on the state legislation that we have been fighting for the last 2 years. Hopefully, we're gonna get something done. But I love St. Paul, and I am in St. Paul. But yes, I will see your mayor very soon. Maybe tomorrow, which is Friday. That was part of my plan. So, yeah, if you hear something from your mayor, just kind of let you know that it's Eid who has just came to see him. But anyways, St. Paul is a fun place to be. We thought that it's more friendlier than than Minneapolis. That's why we started to do and become a little bit aggressive. Than St. Paul.
And I think we have time for one more question from the room before closing remarks.
I'm Sue, I'm the bookseller. But I was paging through your book both today before I came up, and I have a question about some of the responses that the Uber drivers that you interviewed had. Mark in particular, the wealthy man who was just doing this to earn a little money, and said that he did not want to have a minimum wage because he would earn less money because he was smart. We talked about there's the smart aspect that you talk about in that chapter, or the authors talk about in that chapter. So I was curious about that. My second question is Lyft better than Uber, or is there any difference?
Great questions. You know, there was a lot of diversity in terms of, when we did our interviews with drivers, there was a huge variation in terms of how they saw the job, if they saw a future in the job, how committed they were to sticking it out. Some people, there was clearly, a number of people we interviewed did it as a part-time gig. Other people we interviewed who had been taxi drivers saw it as a kind of, full-time thing. It was a, profession. And there was even people who this wasn't the norm, but people who, I remember we interviewed this guy, he liked just driving and liked meeting people, and he kind of he wanted to get away from his wife and kids. He didn't want to be in the home, so he just that's the sense I got. He just liked driving around. And so we heard all sorts of different stories. I think in terms of the kind of question of being smart or being able to outsmart Uber, right, and figure out the algorithm, or outsmart other drivers because they saw themselves as competitors for the same customers. That was a common thing, and almost kind of like a self-justification for doing the job, a way of a story you tell about yourself. So, and the second question, remind me again, Lyft. Yeah, so, we heard from some drivers that Lyft was like a better job, like they liked working for Lyft a bit better. That was just pure pure anecdote. I think, if you're looking at how Uber and Lyft approach questions of regulation and legislation, it's the same. They have the same interest. They have a similar business model. I think Lyft kind of lives in the shadow. Uber, is kind of the big baddie, and so Lyft can kind of draft, kind of behind them. So, but I didn't see that big a difference, in terms of, their the compensation rates were a bit different when we started. I don't know what they are now, but they were better for Lyft for whatever reason. I don't.
Come back to our panelists for, closing remarks, things you thought that you wanted to say, you want to get in at the last minute, overarching question, rideshare companies, pro or con. Alfonso, start with you if that's all right.
Yeah, I just want to reemphasize, a lot of people ask, are they leaving? Are we going to get to a point where we don't have Uber and Lyft in the city? So far as I know, talking to them, we don't know yet, unfortunately. We do know that rideshare alternatives are available and they're starting to make themselves known in the area. So for those people who think, oh, like we're not gonna have an app to use, you most likely will. It could be Uber and Lyft, it could not be. But it seems, at least from what I'm seeing and from the work I'm doing, that the Minneapolis council members are trying to hold Uber and Lyft to that minimum compensation standard, and we'll see where that goes.
Well, thank you. I just want to say that the drivers are human beings, and I care about them, and I hope that you do the same. There are neighbors, like I stated earlier, and friends, brothers and sisters, and family members, neighbors. So they need your support, and that's why I'm sitting tonight in front of you to just kind of amplify that message, or just spread that message with you guys, and hopefully you're going to share with everybody else. We feel that also the public is victim as well, because it's not only in this case the drivers are the only victim. I see that also the public are victim because of, we do have duopoly thing here. You don't have any choice. Either you go to Lyft or Uber, and if you look the prices, they're almost the same. So we need some other alternatives. We need competitors to come into this market so that the people have the choices to make. I mean, I believe that is the way to go at this point, because you can see the result of duopoly or monopoly. It's well known. This is what happens. We're going to hold you hostage, or just agree with us even when we're not paying the minimum wage to those folks who are just moving our economy every day. You want to go to the airport early in the morning, 4 or 5, whatever the temperature is, you have 10, 15 inches of snow on the ground, you will still see an Uber driver just kind of giving you the service to go to the airport. I mean, they're there for you. I mean, you just want to socialize and you just go to a weekend night to some place, you just kind of get a few beer and you want to get home safely, they're there for you. So, I mean, and then they're not complaining. They're okay. They're happy. They want to do what they're doing. But it's Uber and Lyft, those two greedy corporates who are not willing to just kind of humanize them and treat them like human being. We'll expect from the audience that we have here, wonderful audience, that we are here to share and spread the message and kind of tip the story on the other side, because now we're being bombarded with negative news about the drivers. They're the ones who are chasing Uber and Lyft, which are so essential to our life, out of this state. That's not the reality. I mean, $100 ride, only about $17, $16 are paid out of the 100 to the driver. So what we want them is to just pay them fair, at least the minimum wage, which might kind of push them a little bit to their margin of profit. And I was told that it's not about the money that they're having an issue, but it's that they're saying that the market we have in Minnesota is a very small market. So if we accept the demand of those drivers here in Minnesota, what are you expecting, I mean, from the bigger markets that we have? And that's why we need to stop them here and punish them, so that the other markets and other big cities will learn a lesson from what we did to Minnesota. So that is the mentality, and that's something that we might need to share. So I hope that we have learned a little bit of a lesson from each other tonight. Thank you so much.
I don't really have much to add after that, but other than saying that I'm just grateful for people coming out, and you know, if you get the book is in some ways kind of you know, we end the book we don't end it on a hopeful note just because DC's experience has been so troubling and to watch and witness, but you know, the last year here has been just very very heartening, and it's basically what you were saying, which is just there are people fighting back, and yeah, so I'm just it's great, it's great, and I yeah, go Mulder.
Join me in giving a round of applause to our panelists one final time. And thank you all so much for coming. Please purchase a copy of the book from our partner Subtext Books on your way out, and have a safe walk, drive, bus, or ride share home.